Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I will try to talk slow. When I get enthusiastic, I go fast, and then you won't understand. Or only a few people will. You can understand so far?
Yeah.
Some? Very good. Right. So today, I tried to make a reasonably simple talk because I want to try to make it so that everyone can understand. So today I talk about sustainable revegetation of bauxite residue, which is important, particularly in Australia, which is the biggest bauxite producer in the world. So, Australia has three main bauxite deposits. One here in the West Australia, and one up at Go, and another one at Weipa. That's where the open cut mining. All right. Open cut mining to dig out the bauxite. And then the alumina refineries are here for these deposits, and for here it's shipped down to here, and this refinery here is in fact closed now. So this deposit is mined and shipped to here, to China, and probably somewhere more than 50% of the bauxite from here also shipped to China, and the rest of it comes down to Gladstone here. So we are the biggest producer of bauxite, but I think it will be China who's the biggest in alumina production now. So normally bauxite is mined in open cut mining. It's just dug out. The bauxite is just rock that's high in aluminium oxides. It goes to an alumina refinery where through the Bayer process, as hopefully you all know, aluminium containing minerals are extracted in hot sodium hydroxide, caustic soda, sodium hydroxide. But for every tonne of alumina you get 1 to 2 tonnes of residue mud tailings, or you will call red mud. The company that I work with says it's bauxite residue. Red mud has very bad environmental connotations. So on a global basis, we produce about 120 million tonnes of red mud per year, and there's a legacy over the last 120 years of about 2.7 billion tonnes of the residue. Now there's no real use for it yet. People have been looking for a use, but maybe 1 or 2% has a use. The rest of it is stored around the alumina refinery. So what do we do with it? So as I said, the bauxite is mined in open cut mining. It's just rock that's dug up out of the ground. It is then shipped to an alumina refinery, which may be close by or may be a long way away, and where it goes through the Bayer process to turn it into alumina. And then once it's been turned to alumina, it will be sent to a place where it is then made from aluminium oxide into aluminium metal. So, as hopefully you all know, the bauxite comes in here, it's ground up, digested in sodium hydroxide, caustic soda, clarified, filtered, and then it's precipitated and crystallized in here, heated, calcinated to form alumina, which then goes on to be made into aluminium. But for every tonne of this, we get somewhere near 1 to 1.5 tonnes of residue, which we then have to do something with, and it's just deposited around the refinery. Am I going too fast? No? Not for some people. Okay. So, what are the properties of the red mud? Well, it's red in colour, which gives it the name red mud because of the iron oxides in it. 40% iron oxide, 15% in general aluminium. This is aluminium that hasn't been extracted, some silicate in there, silica, some titanium, so the hematite, goethite, the iron oxide, gibbsite, aluminium oxide, the quartz, the silicon, and is the titanium, and there's some materials that are formed during the digestion, such as sodalite, which are calcium, aluminium aluminate, and sodium aluminate, and aluminium sodium aluminate, and these things give the material residual alkalinity and residual sodium in them. pH is 11 to 13, the EC is 30 to 60 deciliter. This means it's highly saline, there's a lot of salts in it, okay? And the exchangeable sodium percentage is very high because of all the sodium. So in other words, because when you extract the alumina out, you extract it with sodium hydroxide, there's a whole lot of residual sodium hydroxide left in the waste, which gives it these properties of the high pH, the high EC because of the sodium salts, and the high exchangeable sodium percentage, which is a percentage of calcium, magnesium, potassium and sodium that is present as sodium because of the high sodium hydroxide in there. So it's generally silt-sized material, like fine mud with some coarse sand in it. So this is the material that we're dealing with. So, around every refinery we end up with enormous storage areas, they're called, they're really waste disposal areas, where this material is produced. And so every refinery has a big area of this material that's left over. Highly saline, sodic, alkaline, and with a high pH. So, what can we do with it? So this is for example the refinery in Ireland that lots of you read papers about revegetation written by Ronan Courtney. This is their area here. Here's how big the refinery is, and here's how big the waste disposal area is. Very big. And so, and you see the area around is all agricultural, it's all pastoral land for farming. So the Environmental Protection Agency will insist that this area here will be revegetated to something like what is around it. And the question is, how do you do that? So, just as a background, what do they do with this residue? Well, believe it or not, in the 1960s up to about 1970, about 30% of it is just dumped into the sea, particularly from the French refineries. The pipe just go out in the Mediterranean Ocean, and this stuff just being stuck into the sea. And this kept on going until about 2015, when the EU banned it. So no longer are you allowed to do that. But this was in the old days. This was a good way of doing it. Don't have to worry about it. It's in the sea. So, and then the next way was lagooning. This method here, and in this way, in the refinery, they try to. It ends up being about 30% solids, and the rest of it is liquid, water plus the sodium hydroxide or the Bayer liquor. And it's deposited this way. And in recent times, we've gone to dry stacking, which means that you take as much water out of it as possible and recycle as much sodium hydroxide in the refinery as possible. so you have less environmental problems when you actually deposit it. So that nowadays they will dry stack, they will end up with about 60% solids. And so this material can still be pumped, still can come through pipes, but it's about 60% solid. And you have much less trouble with the drainage from it. So this is what lagooning looks like. I don't know. This is still done on Rio Tinto in Australia. They do it like this. Here's it just goes into a dip in the ground, or maybe it has some dam, and it just comes in. Basically, it's liquid, about 30% solid, and it ends up looking like this. You see, there's a depression in the ground just full of this liquid stuff. This is actually a picture taken in Gladstone in Australia, and you can see it rained a lot, and this stuff actually ended up going into the sea, and they got a big fine, several $100,000. So that's, and the problem with this is that you have to try and treat all of the drainage that comes out of here nowadays. In the old days, you could just let the water go, but nowadays you need to have drainage underneath here and drain it away and try and recycle it through the refinery, because you can't let this alkaline wastewater that's coming from here go into the surrounding environment. So and this is the famous disaster in Hungary, where the dam wall collapsed and all the liquid red mud went out and through a village like that, straight through the town, see, up to here. And people were injured because they actually walked around in here, they thought it was water, actually it was dilute sodium hydroxide, burnt their legs and so on, caused a major problem. And for people in Europe and researchers, this is a major reason why they've got lots and lots of money, because the EU and the world said, you can't let that happen again, you must do something about it. So put lots and lots of money into red mud research, this disaster. But it's a very atypical situation, because most of the modern refinery will not have a dam like that to start with, because in most parts of the world, the Environmental Protection Agency will not allow you to even think of doing that. So, dry stacking is what is commonly done these days. The material is thickened and the water is taken out, the 50-60% solids, and then the solids are put back onto the ground in beds. So this is a bed of material. It says a few meters, but usually about half a meter or to a meter deep at 60% solid, and then they try to get rid of as much water as possible through evaporation, because the thing is, the less water is in here, the less drainage there will be, and the less problems you'll have with treating it, because in this case, all of this material, there's drains underneath, and the drains go back to the refinery, so all the drainage has to be recycled. It's not allowed to be put into the environment. So the less water you have in here, the better. So they then do what is called mud farming, and they have bulldozers and other equipment, and this is just to open it up to the atmosphere and allow evaporation of water to try and get down to, say, 70% or 80% solids. This is how modern disposal is done, with taking as much water out as possible and then getting as much evaporation, as much loss of water to the atmosphere as you possibly can. This also makes the material more solidified, and you can get more material on top of each other, because each layer is dried before you put another layer on. So you put this layer on and you let all the water out, then you can put another layer over the top. You keep on doing that. It's why it's called dry stacking. So dry stacking is a common method today, requires less space, it consolidates much more rapidly, it's much less problems with the drainage, and these days, especially in the Western world, it's a major problem of getting rid of this drainage and treating it. Otherwise, you'll have to treat all this drainage before it goes into the environment. So it simplifies reclamation processes and the cost, but there's an extra cost of concentrating the slurry and getting the water and sodium hydroxide out, and the cost of the earth-moving machinery. From the point of view of the plant, it's actually quite important to get as much sodium hydroxide out of that waste material before you put it into the drying area, because a major cost of bauxite processing is the cost of the sodium hydroxide. So from economically, it's actually viable to try and take as much of the liquid with the sodium hydroxide in it out and recycle it through the refinery. So that's a background about how the red mud gets there. Every tonne of bauxite, for every tonne of alumina produced, you get 1 to 2 tonnes of what you would call red mud. And here we are, so we end up with these big areas of red mud around all of the refineries. And these days, most environmental protection agencies are not going to allow any refinery to leave it like that. They must reclaim it somehow. So this is not an environmentally acceptable endpoint. A nice area that with things growing on it and being part of looking as though it's part of the natural environment is what is expected. So the question is, how do we do that? How can we get plants to grow in this stuff that lies barren for maybe 20 or 30 years before anything grows in it? So you need a vegetation cover, because normally there's a closure strategy that each environmental protection agency imposes when the new bauxite refinery is built. So these days there will be a closure strategy, and it will include revegetation. So basically all of the new alumina refineries have to revegetate. Putting the vegetation on stabilises the surface against wind and water erosion, because you get dust coming off, it goes into the surrounding lands, and you can get erosion of this alkaline material into the environment as well. It also reduces leaching. So the more plants you've got in, the more evapotranspiration, the more water that's being left go to the atmosphere, the less is going to be in drainage, and the less drainage you're going to have to treat. So this is an important point practically, because basically the refinery doesn't want any more drainage coming out than they can help. Returns organic matter to the soil, because the residue is basically a mineral component, and it doesn't have a big organic component, so it doesn't have much microbial activity. And from the public's point of view, it's aesthetically pleasing, makes it look nice, and people are happy that it's there, and not a big red pond or whatever that the public won't accept. So basically we need to put plants on and revegetate it. We don't have any choice these days. So if we didn't do anything, if we just left it there forever, after maybe 15, 20 years, things would start to grow on it slowly, as you know, as your sites show. So over time, it will weather. So just like primary succession on a glacier or wherever, the weathering of the red mud will occur. And we'll get accumulation of organic matter as the plants start to grow there. And we'll develop an above ground ecosystem of plants growing there, and at the same time a below ground ecosystem with a microbial community and a soil faunal community in there. The problem is that it will take hundreds to thousands of years to actually get a stable ecosystem growing on your red mud. And the people who own the refinery, the big company, they want it to do it in 1 to 20 years, and naturally it's going to take hundreds to thousands of years. So the question is, how do we do it in 1 to 20 years when we know that in reality, if you just left it there, it would take hundreds, maybe thousands of years before it had all weathered and produced something that was similar to a soil, and you've got above and below ground ecosystem. And as I said, we've got to do it really fast. That's our research task if we're talking about revegetation. So, the first thing we have to do is identify the constraints to plant growth in that material. And you probably all know chemical salinity, that means that's the salts in there. It's so high in salts to start with that nothing will grow in it. And mainly those salts are sodium and with accompanying anions, which could be sulfite, chloride, and also aluminate, carbonate, bicarbonate as well. The pH extreme is up around 11 to 13. So not much will grow in there either because of that. The acidity, in other words, this is the amount of sodium. There's so much sodium in there compared to calcium, magnesium, potassium that nothing much will grow in it because then not much is tolerant to that level of sodium. And then lack of nutrient retention and supply. So we know that all these things are going to limit plant production. And so there needs to be some leaching to get the salts leached out, which then becomes a problem today because we have to try and manage the leachate from the area. We need to acidify it to make the pH lower. We need to displace the sodium out of it and put in calcium, magnesium, potassium. We need to add nutrients and organic matter, which will add nutrients. Well, not only do we have chemical constraints in that material, but also physical constraints, because you know what it comes in originally is just this silty mud stuff, which nothing is going to grow on anyway. So its muddy consistence is a problem in the first few years. And then when it dries out, it compacts, and that's going to be another problem that we have to deal with. And then we can have erosion, surface erosion, which then everyone around in the environment complains about, and lack of aggregation. So you're going to have a structure that looks like a soil that has soil aggregates and pores between it so the roots can grow through it. And not only that, so we need to drain it, we need to rip it up and scarify it, stabilise the surface, probably put a mulch on it to stop erosion. Lack of aggregation, we could be adding organic matter, and then we've basically got very little biological activity in that material at all. It's basically a mineral component that's been sterilised by boiling it up in sodium hydroxide. It's been sterilised by heat and by sodium hydroxide. So the microbial community will just come back in the atmosphere, and you'll get a microbial community, but it won't be very active or very big because there's no organic matter there as a substrate for the microbial community to grow. So you don't have nutrient cycling the way you would have in a soil because you don't have a high microbial activity. And then, so we have lack of nutrient turnover because of the lack of microbial activity, and we have a lack of soil fauna as well. So we look at a fertile soil, it's got many earthworms and termites and things, as well as a big microbial community. And when we put this red mud in, it doesn't have any of those things. So we look at that and think, well, maybe it's impossible. But of course, as being researchers, we we will come to the conclusion that it definitely can't be impossible. So what do we do when we try to revegetate this stuff? Well, the first thing we do is usually leave it for 10, 20 years before people do anything with it. Maybe less if it's dry stacked. But basically, before it's revegetated, you just have to leave the material to the surrounding environment. And two things happen when you leave it sitting there for maybe 10 years or so. The two main things happen. The first one is, every time you get downpours of rain and you get leaching of water through the profile. And as you get leaching of water through the profile, the salinity, which is the sodium basically, plus the accompanying anions, which will be chloride and sulfate, plus the soluble alkalinity, which is the hydroxyl, carbonate, bicarbonate and aluminate, these things will leach out with the sodium, which is the main cation there, and leach down the profile. And this will mean that in the surface meter, these things, the excess salts, will be leached down to deeper levels. Because it could be like 10 metres deep, this material, or more. So they'll be leached out of the surface soil just by natural leaching processes. Now, this will reduce the salinity, because the salinity is the salts that are in soil solution, and these things are going to leach out if the water is moving through the soil. Now, the second thing that will happen is, because these here, which are your soluble alkalinity, this is what's giving a high pH in solution, leaching with the sodium means that the alkalinity in the surface will be less, because the alkaline anions are being leached down. And so this means that the pH drops to about 10, which is still too high for most plants, but most of the soluble alkalinity is now being leached out of the surface horizon. And at the same time, because we've lost these things, the pH has gone from 11, 12, 13 down to about 10. And because the main cation in here is sodium, the sodium is being leached out. This means that we'll get a reduction in exchangeable sodium and exchangeable sodium percentage. The ESP is the percent of calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium that's present as sodium. So during the process, which may be, as I said, 10 years or so, also most of the red mud has a significant amount of calcium carbonate in it, because of the calcium oxide and calcium hydroxide that gets put into the Bayer process during the Bayer digestion. So there's a lot of calcium oxide added, and this means we have calcite in the residue, and over time the calcite starts to dissolve. This means that our exchangeable calcium will increase, and this tends to displace more exchangeable sodium and leach it down the profile. So we get an even greater reduction in exchangeable sodium. So the leaching process does a lot of things, which obviously you could speed up if you irrigated it and put water on, but in most cases the refinery is not willing to do that. It's extra cost. So during the process, the first thing we're going to do is leave it to the atmosphere and let it leach out. Now at the same time, if this material started off as being, say, in a dam, and it's maybe only 30% solids, over time this will be drained to maybe 1 metre or 2 metres in depth. And this will mean that even though we're having leaching events during the rainy season, depending on whether it's tropical or subtropical or temperate, it's summer or the winter, over time the residue profile will dry out. So the second thing that happens is that over time, as we allow the residue to dry out, it actually changes its physical condition. So, as we said, we started off and this stuff was just like silty mud stuff. And as you dry it out, it shrinks and solidifies. So it becomes a different material. It changes its physical structure. And once this has occurred, you get down to about 2 or 3% water content. This is irreversible. So this, if it got soaked with water again, it won't turn back into mud. It actually changes its structure. It has a lot of binding agents in it, and once it dries, it shrinks and becomes a compact mass. So it doesn't return to mud, and it can be ripped and tilled, and so you can rip this area up and make it into something that looks like soil. So while we're leaving it there for our 10 years or whatever, two main things are happening. First of all, we're leaching out the excess salts and the soluble alkalinity. And the second thing is, over time, we put drains into several meters. Over time, that surface layer is drying out more and more and more until you get to the point where it cracks and breaks like this, in which case you've basically got a reversible change in the structure of it, and then you can start to manage this material. So that's the first thing we're going to do, is just allow it to do these things, and we can speed them up, but mostly the refineries don't. They just leave it. Now, the next thing we do is apply gypsum to it. Gypsum is calcium sulfate, or commercially you use phosphogypsum. It's a waste product of phosphoric acid manufacture and many other things as well. And this material is basically the main material in it is gypsum. Over in West Australia at Alcoa, they routinely add 1% phosphogypsum before they revegetate. So what does the calcium sulfate do? Well, first of all, the soluble alkalinity that's left, that hasn't been leached, and the soluble alkalinity that's coming into solution from the solid phase alkalinity will precipitate. So, for example, the carbonate bicarbonate will precipitate as calcium carbonate. And that means that the soluble alkalinity is now in solid phase, and the actual pH of the material drops again. And the aluminate can precipitate as a calcium aluminate. So because of this, the pH decreases. And with a bit of luck, we can get the pH from 9 down to 8 or a bit less than 8. The calcium in here is added, exchanges with the sodium, and the sodium leaches out with the sulfate. So we've got the sulfate here, and the sulfate leaches with the sodium. So we get sodium sulfate leaching out. And that means that we decrease the exchangeable sodium, because the calcium that's been added is displacing the sodium. The sodium is then leaching out. So we get a decrease in exchangeable sodium and exchangeable sodium percentage. Because we've added, so just by adding a lot of extra calcium will reduce the exchangeable sodium percentage, and the fact that it starts to displace sodium and then leaks the sodium out means we reduce it even more. And this adding the calcium can also improve physical properties because of the dispersive nature of sodium, which tends to disperse mineral particles, and a divalent cation like calcium tends to flocculate them. So this can have can also improve physical properties. So we left it to leach and dry, then we applied gypsum, and hopefully we got the pH down by that time to around 8 or less. So, and we got the exchangeable sodium percentage from 90% down to maybe 20 or 30%. And normally, also or before planting, we'll also add organic matter, such as compost, animal manures, biosolids. And this adds nutrients and a nutrient supplying capacity to the material that it doesn't have. It also tends to lower the pH because these organic materials have a high buffering capacity, and their pH is usually much lower than the residue. And therefore, when you add it in, maybe 20 tonnes per hectare or something, or more, the pH will be lowered because the pH of this material is lower and it has a high buffering capacity. And because it's got calcium, magnesium, potassium and sodium, as well as sodium, in this organic matter, this will also lower the exchangeable sodium percentage just by adding these other cations that are present in the organic manure. And this will also help in aggregation, the organic matter, and improve the physical properties. So normally, successful revegetation, you'll leave it to leach and dry. You'll then add gypsum and organic matter, and then plant into it. And with a bit of luck, it'll work. So, what's the management strategy for this material, for this stuff? Is drain to several metres and allow it to dry. Apply a mulch to the surface to stabilise it so you don't end up with dust going all over the place. Allow time for leaching to remove salts, so basically we're allowing time for it to drain and to leach. Then we apply gypsum, maybe if it's red mud, maybe 3% or something into the surface horizon. Then allow time for leaching for the calcium to displace the sodium and get rid of some more sodium out of it. Add organic waste to further reduce the pH, get it some buffering capacity, and add nutrients. Then we'll apply some fertilisers because usually not very much nutrients in it, and then plant into the residue, either seed it or plant it straight in. So either some sort of saline tolerant vegetation. So anyway, so the management strategy, and normally we need a target, and usually the EC, which I said is very high to start with, originally 30 to 60 down to about less than 5. That's the salinity. Exchangeable sodium percentage, there'd be an argument about how low you have to get it. It starts off at 60 to 90 and you probably need to get it less than 30%. Some people would say less than 15%, but I think in many cases it's not actually practical to get it that low in a short time. And the pH less than 8 when it's 11 and 13. So if we do all the things that I outlined, we should end up with something that is more or less like this. And if we do, and a material, because it's dry, we can till it. And you can see here this material being tilled with agricultural machinery to produce something like a seed bed. So, here's an example. This is the Rio Tinto sites that have been revegetated in Jamaica. And you see here, originally it was a dam. It was went in as liquid. It was probably 30% solids, and it was left there for a very long time, and then it was drained to several metres to get rid of the water out of it and let it dry out. I think these things are more than 20 years old, maybe 50 years old. Then it was tilled. So you can see here that it was tilled, and the solid material that we produced by drying was then broken up to produce a seed bed. And they then applied gypsum plus organic waste into the site, and then sowed plants and herbs, small bushes, and then let the surrounding, from the surrounding, just natural seeding to the surrounding area, and they ended up with something like this. So slow ingress of native species from around. You've got to realise this is a tropical environment, so things grow really, really fast in Jamaica. So it's not so hard to get some plants that are tolerant to alkalinity, salinity, that will also, and you've got a lot of leaching with a very high rainfall, maybe around 1,000 millimetres a year, and then they end up with something that is quite acceptable. And Rio Tinto are very pleased, and if you look on, you probably can't Google, but you can something else and you'll find lots of pictures of it on the internet. Now in Brazil, they've hydroseeded, in other words, they put the seeds in a liquid form with legumes and then plant other native tree species. And you see this area on red mark, you see is also growing quite reasonably. If we go to Alcoa in West Australia, just out of Perth, the Alcoa refinery, one of them is actually in the suburbs of Perth, of the city of Perth now. It's right, actually houses all the way around the red mud area, the storage area. And this has been covered with mulch and then sown and planted with native species which come from a sand dune ecosystem. So they're already tolerant to high sodium and high salts because they grow in a sand dune which is close to the sea. So they're tolerant to these properties, high pH, high salts, high sodium, and they have a whole organisation of collecting these seeds from native areas and then planting them out into these areas to produce a native ecosystem. Or basically, and I'll show you in a minute why they can do this so successfully. They're very proud of how successful they are, but there is a reason for it. And then finally, we go, probably most of you read papers about this site. This is Ronan Courtney's site in whatever the name of that refinery is. I can't say it, it's in Irish, long. But anyway, this is Courtney et al. Site where they revegetated with grasses and herbs similar to the surrounding pasture land. Not quite the same because these plants are more tolerant of salinity and alkalinity. But this is on red mud, and this is the site that it's 17-year-old now, isn't it? It's the oldest revegetation site of a controlled, replicated experiment on red mud anywhere in the world. And unfortunately, it's going to be covered over if it hasn't already. So, we know we can do it. So what we need is a self-sustaining ecosystem above ground and also below ground. So we want it to basically function just like a soil. But we want to do it in a shorter time as possible and as inexpensively as possible from the point of view of the refinery. Now just finally, I just wanted to show you some data which I added on here. Now, as I said, the Gove refinery in Australia, all of the stuff goes to China. You take it all. They dig it up really fast and just ship it out. This deposit here, some of it is refined here and most of it goes to China. This one is all refined in these refineries here. Now, although this is Australia, this residue here and this residue that's produced here and this one here have very, very little in common. And the way that it's treated and the way it's revegetated reflects the fact that they are basically completely different bauxite deposits, and therefore the residue is completely different. So the two main sources, the North Queensland Weipa site and the West Australian Darling Range site, Perth. These are both lateritic in origin. The main mineral is gibbsite. They're shallow deposits, and they're both mined by open cut mining. And that's about where the similarities end. The Weipa deposit is one of the world's highest grade bauxite deposits, 49 to 53% aluminium oxide. Okay, it's a really good deposit. The Darling Range deposit, which actually produces most of the alumina in Australia, is supposedly the lowest grade deposit that's mined in the world. It's only 27 to 30% aluminium oxide, so it's got an enormous amount of other material in that bauxite, mainly silica. So these two bauxite deposits are pretty different, one on one side of Australia, one on the other. And that means that the red mud we produce is also going to be completely different. So for example, you can divide bauxite residues into mud and sand. The Darling Range deposit, which is the one in West Australia, this is a low quality deposit, it is 30 to 50% sand. So there's all this coarse material that's left. It's basically quartz sand. This is what, when the Bayer process, you don't really dissolve the quartz, so it just remains there. It's been broken up when they crushed it, and it's still there at the end. The Weipa deposit is a very high aluminium content deposit and produces less than 3% sand. So basically all the stuff you get out is that horrible fine silty mud. So this means that because of this, the treatment of the deposits differs greatly, and how you would revegetate it and how you treat it also differs greatly. So just to put some science into the talk a little bit, we'll see the minerality of the North Queensland, the high grade deposit, low in quartz, and also high in sodalite, which is going to give us all that residual alkalinity and sodium that we don't really want. So this material is high grade alumina, high grade bauxite, but it's very difficult to treat and revegetate. The West Australian deposit is a low grade deposit. You see here it's a large amount of quartz in it, and this sand, which is 30 to 40% of it, is very, very nearly 50% quartz. So it's not, even though it's red colour, it looks like red mud, actually there's a lot of quartz sand in there, which means that it's very easy to revegetate. So, and it has virtually no sodalite in it and no residual alkalinity in it. So basically in West Australia, they actually revegetate this material. It's very easy to revegetate. In North Queensland, it's only 3% sand, so basically they're going to try and revegetate this one. It's going to be a lot more difficult. Now just to mention here, you can see it's typically in this red mud, 20 to 40% of it is actually amorphous material if you do quantitative XRD. So we don't actually know what it is. So some of you keen young guys who want to write a paper about red mud, this would be a good thing to find out what actually that is. Now, so the Darling Range deposit, we thicken it to about 56% solid. The residue is, the sand and the mud are separated. The mud is spread in beds, as we saw, by dry stacking. Perimeter embankments are made of sand. Once the bed is dry, the process is repeated, and the storage area is produced in a stack. So here's the dry stacking, and it ends up looking like this. So what they do is they dry stack the mud, and then another one, and they put the sand that's really easy to revegetate as the wall of it. Then they build it up and the sand goes in as the wall and the mud's in here. Because they've got 30% of this sand, which is mainly quartz, or 50% quartz, they build the thing up with the sand on the outside, and then they revegetate into the sand. So this means that it's actually very easy to do because the sand is not red mud as we would think of it. So they have very successful at revegetation because they're very lucky they've got a low quality bauxite to deal with. And so it looks like this. Here's the thing. Here they put the mulch on to protect the surface, and then they put this vegetation which comes from a sand dune and ecosystem into here, and it grows reasonably easily. But you wouldn't be able to do that if it was straight red mud. At Weeper, the other deposit, the one that's a high grade deposit, the mud is not dried or thickened, and the sand's not separated because it's only 3% sand. The mud is piped to a seawater neutralisation plant where they react the mud with seawater. And then it's piped to a storage lagoon, about 30% solids. Now what happens when they react it with the seawater? The seawater is sodium chloride, but it's also got like 4% magnesium, some calcium, some potassium in it. And when the mud reacts with the seawater, you get hydroxycarbonates of aluminium, calcium and magnesium, particularly hydrochalcite, which is this material here, the magnesium, aluminium, hydroxycarbonate. And this means that the soluble alkalinity, the hydroxyl, the aluminate and the carbonate are precipitated out. This means the pH goes down from 12 down to 9 about. And the acidity is lowered because of the adding of magnesium, calcium, potassium. So this is what they do on the other side of town. They actually do this. They react it with the seawater, and they persuaded the EPA that once you react it with the seawater, it's no longer a danger to the environment, and the drainage is not a drainage as a danger to the environment. This seawater neutralisation is being done commercially at 2 refineries in Australia. Weeper deposit, and it goes in as liquid, and then the drainage, because they say it's seawater neutralised, the drainage can go straight into the sea. Now, just to show you that this is some results from one of my PhD students, Eileen Lee, who is actually doing postdoc at Sunyata Sen now. And this is the North Queensland, well, let's start with the Darling Range deposit, which here we have the mud and the sand, initial pH 11 and about 11. After leaching, she leached it for 1 pore volume for 7 times. You see the pH has gone down. Well, what I think would happen is that you leach the soluble alkalinity out and the pH drops because the bicarbonate, carbonate, aluminate is being leached out. But if we look at this residue which has been seawater neutralised, got a pH of 9.3 because of the seawater neutralisation, because of the formation of hydrochalcite and other minerals and the precipitation of the soluble alkalinity. Got an initial pH. After she leached it, you see that a bit of a problem, went back to the same pH as the so nothing actually happened. So basically everything, well, we presume, everything that precipitated when we added the seawater into this material and it precipitated after leaching, we presume that it came back into solution again. So there's another thing for you young keen guys to look at is when you see water neutralised, is it actually permanent or only temporary? And if it's only temporary, is it really a protection to the environment or not? Alright, so in conclusion, management will ameliorate the constraints to plant growth, the saline sonic conditions, the low nutrient status, the fine texture and negligible microbial activity, and if we leave it to leach, leave it to dry, add gypsum, add organic matter, we can ameliorate most of these constraints and we can get things to grow in it. Right. The real problem at the moment is we don't have any long-term results. The longest term experiment that ever ran was 16 years and got covered over. So, is it really sustainable in the long term? Well, everyone in the room will be dead by the time we find out, because it will be another generation that decides whether what we've done is sustainable or not.